I realized that after.
So welcome everybody to today's session. It's all about family, school, and community partnerships, so FSCP, and the resources and supports we have available at the Colorado Department of Education. And I'm really excited to share with you our most recent set of tools that we have available for everyone to use. So before we get started, I would love for all of you to type in the chat your name, which we can see on Zoom as well, your position, so what you do and where you do it, and then what do you hope to gain from this session? So I have a plan in my head, but I'm also ready to alter that plan to meet the needs of people in the session. I always feel like we need background music while people are chatting. And Britt, do you have anything that you hope to gain from this session?
Oh, I forgot.
Perfect. Melissa, we can definitely do that. Sharing best practices. Now they're coming in fast and furious. Let's see. Perfect. All right. It sounds like we're all on the same page as far as learning and sharing best practices. So we will definitely get to that. Because we're such a small group, as you have questions, please feel free to unmic and ask them, or you can type them in the chat, and I'm going to ask Britt and Chris just to monitor that. I definitely want this to be a conversation as opposed to me just talking. So this was the plan I have in my head, and I think that it does meet the needs that your expectations that you put in the chat. So first, I'm really interested in making sure that all of you are aware of the messaging that CDE is giving to districts primarily, which trickles down to schools, around what family school community partnerships look like. Because as you are preparing teachers to go in, hopefully to Colorado schools, this is going to be the message that they hear. Then I want to go through some of the available resources that we have at CDE for both in-service and pre-service teachers. And then I mentioned earlier, we have this new tool, this FSCP framework and user's guide. And so I want to show you online where some of these resources are. And this is what I'm really most excited about, is this framework and user's guide. So this is a slide that I had up on Monday when I was doing my quick intro before Dr. Sanders spoke. And I'm not going to go through it all again, but this is just a review to show the evolution of family school community partnerships in Colorado. And you can see that it went from 11 years ago having this SACPI, great acronym, State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education, to then the creation of my position, which, as I mentioned, is very unique to have a director level legislated position for partnerships. Colorado is the only state in the country that has this. Then the creation of my office, which, full disclosure, my office is still just me, but the fact that we have an office on the org chart at CDE for Family School Community Partnerships was actually a big step. The development of the framework that I'm going to share with you, and then this pre-service consortium, which is why we are here all week together. Not going through all of this slide either. This is just a representation to show that Colorado has a very intentional systemic support structure for partnerships. So we are guided at the department by federal and state level legislation, which then trickles down to CDE helping to implement the legislation. And so those are some of the examples of how we do that. And then my work at the department then trickles down to districts who have mechanisms in place through district accountability committees, directors and coordinators that support partnerships. We have, so a lot of this week, we've been talking in these sessions about having a higher ed community of practice around family engagement. For the past 4.5 years now, I think, I have been hosting district level communities of practice with my district contacts. So that's sort of where we got the idea for this. And then the district support trickles down to schools. So people like Damien, who is a family engagement liaison, and Jeffco is an example of how districts can then support schools in doing this work, who then ultimately are the ones who work most closely with students and family to improve student achievement and overall school climate. So that's just a representation that we are very thoughtful in Colorado about having this organized, intentional, systemic support structure. If you have follow-up questions about this, I am happy to discuss them with you. Actually, let me pause there. Does anybody have a question about any of the acronyms or further questions about the systemic support structure?
Question, Darcy.
Yeah.
I know a lot of times small grants or sometimes big grants come out from, there's like the literacy grant that they just sent out again. And do you foresee any grants for IHEs or districts that could go for the FSCP initiatives in the future?
So I would love to see that happen. I'm not sure about the immediate future, but there are grants currently available through CDE where family school community partnerships could be a component of that. So for example, I'm going to say an acronym, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know what it stands for. So at CDE, we have the EASY grant that comes out of federal programs, EASI. And so stakeholder engagement is a portion of that where you can request funds to support family school community partnerships. I'm trying to think, there's dropout prevention grants and of course 21st century. So oftentimes FSCP is a component of existing grants, and hopefully in the future and with more momentum, especially now coming from this pre-service consortium for IHEs, I am very hopeful and keeping my fingers crossed that we might have some more specific FSCP grants. Any other questions? Yeah, Melissa, my experience has been that just like in legislation, so family school community partnerships are pieces of a lot of legislation. So like the READ Act, families are supposed to work with teachers to develop their READ plan, and with ICAP, the individual career and academic plan. But oftentimes the family engagement piece gets backburnered for other portions of the law. And that may be what happens with some of the funding opportunities as well, where they exist. It's not just highlighted, I think, as much as it needs to be, in my personal opinion. So these are some buzzwords that I often share with districts and schools when I work with them. I'm not going to go over all of them, and we've really touched on a lot over the course of this week. But I always stress with people that family school community partnerships is a research-based strategy for student achievement, school climate, and really turnaround. But oftentimes, one of the biggest challenges is that FSCP ends up being reactive instead of proactive. And so when you think about it, and I think it's just human nature, if things are going well, you think things are going well, I don't need to take the time, to reach out and work with my students, my kid's teacher, or, I don't need to call a parent with good news, for example. But partnerships are so much more effective when they're proactive. So, for example, schools and districts that are on the 5-year accountability clock for being low-performing schools by Colorado state frameworks, I often encourage them to focus on family school community partnerships first, because if you can get your families and community on board, you'll be much more likely to get off the accountability clock faster than if you wait until year 4 out of year 5 and then decide to bring the families in. I also really try to help schools and districts see that we need to move beyond random acts of partnership. So those traditional activities that we always do, which I'm not saying are bad things. So, your reading nights, your math nights, parent-teacher conferences, back-to-school barbecues, all of those things. Those are still good things to do, but we want to make sure that they are linked intentionally to school improvement goals. So if you think about the Unified Improvement Plan, how do the activities that you do link to the major improvement strategies on the Unified Improvement Plan? Integrate and elevate. We've talked a lot about that throughout this week, but not necessarily in those words maybe. But what I found is that FSCP is most beneficial when it's integrated throughout all of the different aspects of school. So, your literacy, math, behavior, school safety, attendance, all of those things. But it needs to be elevated to be some sort of priority, or again, it ends up being reactive rather than proactive. And then finally, Yemi spoke about this a little bit in his talk yesterday, which was phenomenal. The difference between context and content expertise. And this really resonated with me. When I read an article a couple years ago, and I wish I remembered the author, and I don't, but I'm not just making this up, where when you think about teams, so like school accountability committees in Colorado, where school staff and families and community members and sometimes students come together to work towards school improvement goals. I hear a lot from parents that they don't necessarily know what role they play on the team and what expertise they bring. And so in this article, it was talking about how school staff bring their trained content expertise, but families and the community members have their context expertise. And we know from research that students spend anywhere from 70 to 80% of their waking hours outside of school. And so with that being the case, we know that that context expertise is critical in order to have equitable and effective partnerships. So any comments, questions that people want to share before I move on? Yeah, Roseanne.
Yes, so, looking at your slide here, the one thing that, so my research agenda is culturally responsiveness. Mm-hmm. And I was telling Brittany, you cannot read anything about people's definition about culturally responsiveness or people's implementation of culturally responsive service or teaching without parents and family engagement at the top of the list.
Yep.
And what some of the really thoughtful people regarding this issue say is that it has to. So what I'm thinking is on your slide is the disposition, because Yemi talks about this all the time, the disposition of learning on both sides of the table. And it's not like people, I don't mean to set it up as a contest,
right?
But this idea that, so anyway, what you just said made me think about the school people as the experts often bring parents or families or grandpas into the school. And then they teach people how the school operates, how people are supposed to operate when they come and all of that. Instead of it being genuine partnership, which is, we know that we have expertise and we also know that families have expertise.
Yeah.
And so then when we come together, we share expertise. And so I just don't know if that's already represented in what you have, but I just think that notion about what's really the point. It's not all about school to teach, school to community, but it's really community to school and all the opportunities that we as school professionals have to learn from families and students and communities.
Yeah, and so in the polls that participants on Monday during Mavis Sanders' keynote shared, one of the last polls was about which of the national standards do you find easiest to implement and what do you find the hardest? And sharing power overwhelmingly was the hardest. And I've seen that throughout my entire career as well when it comes to family school community partnerships. And just concretely in Colorado, the best example that we see is around school accountability committees. And there's often very different expectations it's hard to do that well, to have a high functioning, true partnership on accountability committees. And I think one of the difficult dynamics there that I've seen is that in the law, it says that a parent needs to be the chair, or if there are co-chairs on the committee, a parent needs to be one of the co-chairs. And yet oftentimes it's really functions at the will of the principal, because it's ultimately the building leader who sets the stage to have space in the school, to hold the meeting, to give the time and whatnot. So there's this interesting, I don't know if it's a power dynamic, but this interesting relationship between a parent being the head of the committee, but really if the principal or a building leader doesn't have that same vision, it's really difficult to be successful. And Damien, I know you're in a school. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, if you've seen that.
Yeah, so for our SAC meetings, exactly what you're talking about. I'd like to see it flipped. We do have families that consistently participate in the SAC meetings. But I think the power sharing dynamic really doesn't exist, at least not the way that it should.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do through my role at CDE is to have, because I do a lot of SAC and DAC trainings, and try to have schools and districts focus more on the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. And Roseanne, actually, the first question I often ask of participants in the room is, in your opinion, what is the purpose of an accountability committee and why did you want to be on it? And then once we have that discussed, then we can, move forward from there. But yeah, sharing power, I think in every aspect of life is challenging, right? Anybody else? Yeah, Kristen.
So I served on a school board for a charter as a parent representative. Which was very weird for me because I'm usually the educator representative in every setting. And in this case, I was a parent. And it was really fascinating for that group. They would see things like in test results and they would say, I'm not a professional educator, but this number worries me. And we had a really tough time pulling in parent representatives because they didn't have that confidence. And so I wonder about that question of context versus content. How to help empower parents that you do know your kids and you know your community and that your opinion is valuable in that situation. But it was just always this constant dynamic of, this worries me, but I'm not sure I know enough to say something about it. How to empower parents for that.
I love that example, Kristen. And don't let me forget to share something with you when we get to the resource sharing part, because one of the resources we have at CDE that I'm going to show everybody where to go are promising partnership practices. We have 6 years worth of them. And one of the practices from 2020 is actually from Douglas County, where they worked with, I believe it was monolingual Spanish speaking parents to help build their capacity around advocacy to feel comfortable to step into those leadership roles in the district. And so I will show you where to go for that, but that's a really good concrete example that I think is also generalizable to help build capacity and confidence in any parent. But yeah, it's intimidating. And I think it's intimidating even for people who are there as a parent rep, but who are also in the education world. It can be intimidating. Yeah, Roseanne.
Yeah, so I think what's so important is to think about which contexts and which meetings do you feel intimidated, Darcy? You know, or Kristen, or any one of us, right? So I think about that for myself. When do I feel intimidated? And what is going on? You know, what is going on? And so it's not just that, I don't think it's just that the parents feel intimidated because they don't think that they know as much as the educators, but it really is because it really is about how the context is set up.
Yep.
And I have a dear friend who was principal of a huge middle school, and she said, you've got to come to our parent meetings. You got it, because we talked about this all the time, and because she was working so hard on quality relationships with families, because we know when they're in place, children learn more. And so I was just like, honey, I've been to so many parent meetings in my career. I don't want to come. I always, so she had a very diverse school. And so anyway, she talked me into it. I'm walking into the building and I'm thinking, this is just like, this is just going to be like always. There's 4 Hispanic women who come, mothers. They bring their 2-year-olds and they sit in the back of the room. They don't have any power, and they don't think they have any power, and the school really doesn't let them know that the school thinks they have any power. You know what I mean? Right. And anyway, in her place, what she did is she set up 4 different school accountability meetings, or she called them leadership teams. One was for the Hispanic families, one was for the Black families, one was for the white families, and one was for the international families, because she had a bunch of families moving in from Russia and all over the world. And this was actually at Prairie Middle School, which is right on the border of the Cherry Creek School District and the Denver Public Schools, right by Overland High School. And she started working with each group separately. It meant just a ton of extra work on her part, a lot of extra night meetings. But she also then had her Black teachers join the Black leadership group, and her Hispanic teachers join the Hispanic leaders group, so that so people could feel the connection to one another within the race group. And then they, she said it was very dynamic. At the time, they were working with Yemi and with Glenn Singleton. And they let the whole process evolve, and very naturally then the group started saying, hey, wait a second, why do the Black people meet on a different night than we do? Why do the white people meet? What is really going on? Anyway, so I just love the courageous work that goes on. Some people, now we call it anti-racist work, but really across racial lines. How do we get really smart about building alliances so that people really feel welcomed, as the first standard says, and not intimidated? What are all the ways in which we can overcome contexts that have people feeling intimidated?
Yeah.
I think about some of the master's degree courses or the PhD courses that I took where I felt completely intimidated, and it really, part of it was absolutely about me, and part of it was about the professor and their friendliness or lack thereof, or their it really is a two-sided street,
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it Jingzi? Is that how you pronounce it? Yingzi? You're muted.
Yeah, you may call me Jeannie. Jeannie is easier, I guess. Yeah, just hearing what Roseanne has just said, I really think the concept of culturally responsive practice also applies in the situation of homeschool community connection right there. Because when we talk about parents, and sometimes it's the issue of empowerment, sometimes actually it's the cultural piece. And because my expertise is ESL, CLD education. So when I was a school teacher, I got tons of opportunity working with parents from all these very different diverse cultural backgrounds. I was in Canada actually when I was a school teacher. Okay, so Canada is the kind of country, not the same as the United States. Okay,
I agree with you.
And a lot of times, if you think about the parents from certain Asian culture and the parents from Native American background, they have this kind of traditionally such a huge respect for teachers and schools. Actually, one of the reasons they don't participate a lot in voicing their opinion or asking questions is because they believe that the school and teachers know the best.
Right.
And they are the experts. I trust the schools and the teachers, and I give my children to the schools and teachers. They know what to do. So it's just culturally, that's the way. However, it doesn't work in the Canadian system. It doesn't work in the American system because quite often, you know, we depend so much on the parents telling us about their needs sometimes, right? And in that kind of situation, I really think that it is important to help the principals and the teachers and the teacher preparation program, okay, where I'm from. We need to really educate our future teachers about how to reach out to the parents and not only learning about their culture. That's only the first step. Sometimes we think, okay, we need to learn their culture and we respect them. No, actually, it's not going to help the children. We also have to help the parents understand about the new system they are in. And so it's really the kind of mutual conversation, mutually beneficial conversation that has to take place. I can give you an example, actually. It's really about a student from Taiwan, okay? And that student got immersed in the Canadian culture right away, playing basketball, you know, started talking a lot, and the parents were concerned. And the parents told me basically, you know, they thought that their child played too much and talked too much, you know, and they were concerned basically, and they thought that I could do something to really rein the child a little bit. So actually it got to be my turn to talk about the whole educational system. And if you really want your child to be successful in this society, the expectation for a successful person actually is different from the expectation in Taiwan, you know. And then I will learn from the parents about their expectation. At the same time, I share the expectation about success in this society in order to achieve some kind of mutual understanding. And I just think this is something that the principles are very, very important. I totally agree. At the same time, there's some kind of education or professional development we can do at the teacher's level, right, to talk about the connection between our schools and the parents and the community.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And then I think a lot, in my opinion, a lot of what needs to change in pre-service is just far more opportunities for pre-service teachers to practice interacting with families. Again, because teachers are comfortable with students. Yes. But when it comes to families, it's intimidating, it's scary, you don't have that practice. And, you know, so the more we can prepare them, I think the easier and the better those conversations about learning about different cultures and you know, finding the place where there's the expectations of your local system, but you also don't want to totally divorce yourself from your heritage and your culture, and finding that place.
Is helping the parents and students build a bridge so that they can go back and forth.
Exactly. Damien?
Yeah, so I really appreciate what's being said here, right? Because culturally, there is that implicit trust. There is that, you know, hey, I'm going to give you my kiddo and you do what you do and everything's going to work out fine, right? Yeah. And I also think that something that I see with the school system, not only from my own experience as a parent, but from also working here at Jefferson, is that there is this assumption that families know how to navigate a school system. And why do we assume that? Why do we just believe that a family knows, you know, about everything in this school system, and even within their own school, that they know about SAC meetings and that they know how PTO or PTA works, or that they know what their rights are, you know, any of those things. And we assume that they just know, that somehow they should just know these things, and that, you know, if they're not reaching out or they're not, you know, doing certain things, then it's because they don't want to. Well, that's not true. It's just because they don't know how to.
Right.
And it falls on us. I feel it's our responsibility to broker that, to help families understand our systems and how to navigate them. Then it's entirely the family's choice what they want to do with that. It's their, and we can't We can't, make any assumptions or have any judgment around how a parent chooses to engage at that point. For some parents, being on campus and checking grades and attendance and having those conversations at home, that's going to be enough for that family. And that's engagement. For other families, they do want to come to all the SAC meetings. We have to honor however it is they choose to engage.
Right. And that requires us as educators to broaden our definition of what partnerships is or looks like. And I think, Damien, it's particularly evident, I would say, at the scrolling through at the middle and high school level. So I'm sure you see that even more than in elementary school, as parents are having to navigate multiple teachers, maybe content that is over their heads. I'm thinking especially, we keep hearing about the new math. I don't even know if you can call math the new math anymore, because it's really not that new, but people still say that. But I remember a couple of years ago, I was it was a elementary school in Mapleton School District. And I was it was either a 3rd or 4th grade classroom. And I saw how they were learning different division problems on the board. I'm like, I have no idea. This makes 0 sense to me. And I do know how to multiply and divide, but not the way they're learning how to. So just double checking, Britt, I have 90 minutes, right? Everybody's set for 90 minutes if they can stay, not an hour. Okay, good. I didn't know how quickly that I had to go through this. So that was sort of the stage setting in terms of what we mean. And again, we're still in the section of what is CDE messaging to schools and districts. So we follow, prior to coming to the Colorado Department of Education, I was at Johns Hopkins University, and I worked with Joyce Epstein, who has her own model for what family school community partnership implementation looks like. And so I took her model and then Coloradoized it, because that's what we do. So instead of Joyce's 6 types of involvement, in Colorado, in legislation, Senate Bill 0990, it says that at the state level, we need to align our partnership work with the national standards for family school partnerships. So instead, and that's why Mavis on Monday talked about the national standards instead of the 6 types. And so this slide right here shows basically how partnerships, what we know research says partnerships should be structured at the school level. This is not the district level. That's a whole different session that I'm not talking about today, but I'm happy to set up a phone call if anybody's interested in that. But at the school level, we know there should be some sort of typology where schools can organize their individual activities and initiatives. But we also know that you need shared leadership, so like an accountability committee, action planning, the UIP, Unified Improvement Plan, and then evaluating your individual activities or initiatives, and then your partnership program as a whole. So this is a slide that I show when I'm doing trainings, just to say, if you want to have a comprehensive and sustainable partnership program at your school, this is what decades of research shows works. But it works best when it is customized, comprehensive, and continually improved. And so these 4 components here, the 4 main components, is the comprehensive piece of that structure. But then it's going to look different at Jefferson Junior Senior High as opposed to Vaughn Elementary in APS, as opposed to Norwood School District that has 107 or so students in the entire district. It's going to look different, but the structure, the organization of it is what stays the same. Of course, it's Colorado and nobody is required to do this because of local control, but this is a message that we share, and a lot of schools do see that it works. And then as we drill down into the really nitty gritty, we get to this slide. Just by a show of hands, I know Damien has seen this. Raise your hand if you are familiar with this slide. All right. Oh, good. So this is new for a lot of people. This tends to be people's favorite slide, and it really resonates with them. So there's an organization in Washington, D.C., the Flamboyant Foundation, and they did their own summary. This is not a meta-analysis. It would not make it into a peer-reviewed journal, but this is really just a summary of what family school community partnership activities have a lower impact on student outcomes versus a higher impact. And I always stress when I show this slide that it's not bad versus good. So you should not look at these and think, oh, we're not doing any more performances or potlucks because they don't have a direct link to student achievement. That's not the case. We often find that on the low impact side, that really is what leads to a welcoming climate and how families and schools start to build a relationship. But if you want to see a more direct impact on student outcomes, whether they be academic or behavioral, that's where you want to move into those higher impact strategies. So inviting parents to come into the classroom, not now, obviously, but to observe how a math lesson is taught so they can support that at home. And there's a wonderful promising partnership practice from Vaughn Elementary in Aurora Public Schools that did just that this past school year before March, obviously. Having goal setting talks, positive phone calls home. These are high impact strategies that we know have a direct link to student outcomes. I'm gonna pause here. Questions, comments?
I just want to share something here looking at your higher impact actions. And this is very helpful. And actually, I was in New Jersey for 14 years because New Jersey is a state, is what is national accreditation state. Basically, you have to get national accreditation in order to offer a program. Otherwise, you're out of business. Okay, that's the state requirement. And family community engagement is one of the standards for the national accreditation. So it's a big deal in New Jersey. I just remember when my son went to school, his classroom teacher actually would do a survey of all the parents, you know, so that they know the expertise among the parents. And then the teacher would actually reach out to the parents to ask them as guest speaker to take turns to come to her class. And that part is so cool. And most of the children's parents are really willing to do that kind of thing. And sometimes it could be during the regular class teaching whenever the expertise is relevant to the curriculum. And sometimes it's for other things that will be interesting to the children, and the teacher would organize different events for this kind of thing. And it is so powerful.
And thank you for sharing that. And that's also a great example of sharing power. You know, I think oftentimes we view sharing power narrowly as being on a formal committee. That's not the case.
And then in our teacher education program, actually, we require our teacher candidates to come up with a plan based on the field context in terms of how to get the parents involved in the way that empower the parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ginny, you and I seem to have a lot in common because I was born in Canada. My mom's from Montreal. And she recently sent me, this was about a month ago, 3 copies, I'm not even kidding, 3 copies of my Canadian birth certificate, just in case, just so I had it. And my dad is actually from New Jersey. So a lot in common. So So in addition to working at CDE, I also adjunct. I teach a course on family school community partnerships at University of Denver. And one of the assignments that I give to my students is, and these are master students, is to practice making a positive phone call home. It is hilarious and kind of a little sad to see how terrified these young 20-somethings are of making a phone call. And they're like, can I just text? And I'm like, nope, you need to pick up the phone. You need to call. Like, if you want to send an email and say, I would love to talk to you, how about 1 o'clock on Thursday? Like, do that. But you are talking to them. Well, can't I just talk to a parent when they pick their kids up from school? I'm like, okay, you know, this thing that you have in your hands, Its primary purpose is to make a phone call. So you need to do that. But after that assignment of having, oh, this is my cat, Crowley. After the assignment of having to make that positive phone call, it's 100% positive. And they love it. And they're so glad they did it. And it totally changes the relationship. So it does work. You're going to see a cat.
We also had our teacher candidates actually write a note to the parent, because they had to learn how to use the language that parents understand.
Yeah.
It could be a very interesting exercise. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they need to practice. Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in using this slide to, again, maybe even think through some of the coursework and some practice opportunities for your prep programs to incorporate around family school community partnerships. So that is the messaging that we had from CDE up until about the beginning of this calendar year. We're still in 2020, believe it or not. So in January of 2020, CDE released this new preschool through 12th grade FSCP framework. This was part of a national project. So there were 9 other states in Colorado's cohort that each worked on their own individual state frameworks. But then we would meet together over the course of 2 years, quarterly, just to hear updates, to get feedback, to make sure it's linked to research. And so now I'm going to talk through, so the slides that I shared with you are still relevant, but what I was hearing after being in my role, it's now been 7 years, so at the time 6 years, is that districts were ready for more. And so when it came to, let me just go back here, to the national standards, what a lot of my district contacts who have been working with me very closely over the past, 5, 6, 7 years, is that they needed more than just these buckets of how to organize individual activities, but they really wanted to go deeper into what do we really need to have in place in our districts to make sure that partnerships are genuine, relevant, meaningful, but not just saying that they are, moving into action so that they truly are. So that is when I decided that yes, Colorado wanted to be a part of this cohort run by CCSSO, so the Council for Chief State School Officers, as well as NAFSCE, the National Association for Family School Community Engagement. This is just the timeline of the project, which basically, just so that you know, over the course of 18 months, 18 months, 2 years, this is a document that was created by Colorado stakeholders for Colorado stakeholders. So there was a very long, tedious, exhausting, but very beneficial process that my colleagues and I went through at CDE to make sure that we had the best supports possible for what Colorado families and educators say they needed. And I also just wanted to share with you the purpose of the framework that I'm about to share with you. So the whole purpose of why we even have a framework is to develop systemic and sustainable state and district level structures that proactively integrate and elevate, my favorite rhyming words, FSCP that link to positive student outcomes and an inviting school culture. So not only are we encouraging districts to do this, but we at CDE and at CDHE and Department of Human Services and Public Health and Environment, we all need to be working on this together. So without further ado, I showed the slide for about 30 seconds on Monday, it was. But this is the definition that, again, co-developed with families, staff, the State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education, CDE, districts. This is the definition of what CDE says family school community partnerships mean. And I highlighted in green some of the words that I think are most, or phrases that are most powerful to consider. So these groups actively partnering together, effective and equitable practices, and then improving educational outcomes. I think sometimes it's been my experience that people know that families, school, and the community should work together. We know it's mandated in some cases, but sometimes we forget why. We know the what, but we forget the why. And the whole purpose of it is to improve educational outcomes for children and youth, because we know it's what's best for them. And so we really wanted to make sure to focus on that. So when I was doing focus groups with some of my district contacts across the state, they said that two things would be most helpful for them to have in this framework, in this document. And let me just back up too to say, at a State Department, I'm basically 3 or 4 groups removed from actual families for the most part. My main contact are districts, who then work with schools to work with families and students. And so my district contacts were saying that they wanted 2 things. They wanted a 1-pager, which you see on the right-hand side of your screen, so that they could put this in front of leadership, in front of their bosses, to say, look at this, this is what we should be doing for FSCP. But then my actual contacts, so like Susan and Linda in Jeffco, and I see Claudia's on here from APS, so Cookie Hansen and APS. They wanted more detail about what does it actually look like to create an inclusive culture, to build trusting relationships. And so that's the next document that I'm going to share with you. So after doing focus groups and larger quantitative surveys with families, community members, school and district staff across the state, these 4 essential elements came up as themes that all of those groups found most critical to having the most effective and equitable partnerships. And the last thing, I'm a very action-oriented person. And the last thing that I wanted was to just have, these 4 elements with the definition as like a mission statement. So that's why it's super small on the screen, but that's why you'll see that each of those essential elements has 3 guiding questions underneath. And I tested out these questions with multiple different groups to see, do they make sense? Was it helpful for you? So again, that was part of this development process as well. So these guiding questions can then lead to conversations among families, staff, students, accountability committees, PTAs, PTOs, so that they can really think through, how do we move partnerships forward? I just have a couple more slides to share with you, and then I want to chat through this framework. So these are the 4 essential elements and their definition, which was on the previous slide. And so our first step was having this 1-pager out, but then again, we wanted to make sure that there was something very implementable. Is that a word, implementable? I'm thinking it is. If not, it is now. But something that schools and districts could take with little to no revisions to then use in their schools around these essential elements. And so I ended up working with Dr. Steve Sheldon, a former colleague of mine at Johns Hopkins, to put together a user's guide and a series of rubrics. So 1 rubric per guiding question under the essential elements, so a total of 12 rubrics. And as Steve and I were really digging into what each of those guiding questions could mean and look like in practice, these are there 7, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 6 dimensions of excelling partnership programs kept sort of bubbling up to the top. And so these are themes that came up and that we address in the research portion of the user's guide that all excelling partnership programs should have. And none of these, I don't think, will come as a surprise to anybody in this Zoom session right now. But you want to make sure that you address inequities, that you have strong principal leadership, that you evaluate, that you share leadership, etc. I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can read more about them in the user's guide, which I will show. But then we also have these 3 steps for schools or districts or early childhood programs in collaboration with their families and community members and students, particularly at the secondary level, for them to go through so that you have all of those voices rating, in their opinion, how the school is doing with those 4 essential elements, and then what the school, district, early childhood program should be prioritizing. So these are the 3 different steps. And again, I'm going to show you exactly where to find all of this on the CDE website. So this is the first step where we ask individuals to rate how they think the school is doing in terms of creating an inclusive culture and describing concrete examples of why they think that. And this is just an example of what one of the rubrics looks like. So the second guiding question under the first essential element, creating an inclusive culture. And Steve and I, in developing these rubrics, were very intentional, where if schools were only focused on compliance and the bare minimum of compliance, we labeled that as not working on this yet, because we need to go far beyond compliance and far beyond, to the extent possible, giving families information in the language they understand. That is not good enough anymore, especially if we are focused on equity. And so we were very aspirational, I would say, when it comes to these rubrics. So you had your rating sheet where participants could write down their thoughts on the essential element. Again, each of the essential element has the guiding questions with a rubric. And then we have what I call the Cosmo quiz at the end, where you tally up all of your responses and you see how your stakeholders think that the school is doing. And the interesting thing here is that we encourage teams to not just look at the final score at the bottom, because you could have one score where building trusting relationships is really high, but dedicating necessary resources is a whole bunch of zeros. Or you could have them pretty easily, and evenly divided. So we encourage groups and teams to really look at each element individually and not just that composite score, so that can help the teams really see where do they want to focus, how to make it manageable, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop talking while I pull up the website and show you some of these things. So while I do that, I would love to open it up for some discussion, some questions, resource sharing of maybe what you have in place to support some of this work moving forward. So I'm just switching screens here. Somebody chime in if anybody has anything.
So I'll share something that was really great at our school yesterday. Here at Jefferson, 50% of our families, their preferred home language is Spanish. So that's a large number, and we don't have a lot of staff that is Spanish speaking. So something that we have here in Jefferson, Jeffco Public Schools, is the over-the-phone interpretation. And so I literally, the last few weeks, I've just been going to everyone in the building. Here, this is the printed instructions. This is how you do it. Get comfortable with it. Come see me if you need help, whatever. So yesterday, one of our counselors, one of our high school counselors, he made about 60 phone calls home. And he really figured out how to use that OPI, that over the phone interpretation. Yeah. And he kept that interpreter on the phone for a little over an hour and just calling family after family and talking to them. How are you? How are you doing? How are things going? You know, glad your kiddo's showing up. Just great conversation. But you know, I was really proud of him for doing that, and it means so much. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it really is. It really adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that example that you shared, Damien, reminds me of a lot of the best examples that I hear over and over again are often the simplest ideas. So making a phone call home is a simple thing to do, but simple does not mean easy. And coordinating with the OPI and having that person on the phone for an hour, having the courage to give something new a try that you may feel uncomfortable about. Those are not easy things to do, but oftentimes the best ideas are the simplest ideas, which I love. And I hear things like that over and over again. Can all of you see this website? I'm just making sure that you see what I see. Okay. So this is my main website at CDE. So the slide that I just had up that had the images of a whole bunch of different resources, all of those are hyperlinked to where you can find them on the CDE website because it's not easy to navigate. So when Britt sends that out, and Britt, I will send you these slides, I'll email them to you. Just know that you can click on all of those images and it will take you to the right place. So this is my main page. These individual videos, there's 28 of them, are about to be moved onto their corresponding essential element page. So I'm going to come back to this page. I want to start first with the framework. So this is the P12 framework page. And each of the essential elements you can click on, which takes you to that essential element page, which highlights the definition and the 3 guiding questions. We have some materials and references that people can use to help implement this. And then we have them linked, I mentioned earlier, to the promising partnership practices. And this is something, so 2020 was our 6th edition of PPPs, Promising Partnership Practices. So they are categorized in a couple of different ways. So they are first categorized by essential elements. And then you can drill down further to sort them by level. So district, early childhood, elementary, secondary, and higher ed. I will tell you right now, early childhood and higher ed examples are few and far between, but we do have some and we're getting better. So you can see here, PEDAL forum. So standard 3, supporting student success, that a district is doing to build trusting relationships. And then you click and you see this one pager about what Westminster Public Schools is doing to support student success through building positive relationships for students. You can also sort the promising practices. Hold on, let me go back. By the complete editions. So if you only want to see the 2020 edition, the most current one, you can click on that and it brings up all. We had 38 practices this year. This year was a small year for obvious reasons, but you can see great addition this year. In past years, we've had anywhere from like 45 to 60 practices. And Damien, how many times have you guys been recognized? Is it twice, 3 times? I've lost track.
Jefferson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at Jefferson it's been 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's been a lot. So then we also, if you go back to the main framework page, this is where you can find, and a lot of this is a work in progress. So just know we're still building out this website as I speak. But we have the user's guide. And we also have it down below as a fillable form that you can download and then fill it in online. So we started, sorry if this makes you dizzy, me scrolling through. So this is just my little background around why we have a framework to begin with. An introduction about why equity and FSCP is so critical. Explaining a bit about the rubric. These are where those domains come in that I mentioned, the themes that kept popping up. And then we have, again, the series of all of the rubrics for each of the guiding questions. So all of this is free, available for anybody to use and really dig into, maybe to use in some of your prep programs or in your schools. And we also have some general resources here to help with the implementation of family school community partnerships in general. So one of the things that we're in the process of doing, October is Family and School Partnership and Education Month in Colorado, and we generally celebrate it in person with a huge event, and the governor shows up, and we have the promising partnership practices for that year's edition on poster displays, like all around a room. And Damien's smirking, so he knows about this. And this year, obviously, we did not do that. And so instead, what I did was I gave the PPP recipients an opportunity to have a follow-up interview with me. And so 28 of the acceptance, the PPP recipients said yes, they would love to have a follow-up video. And so they were all posted here, lumped together on my main page to celebrate October, and CDE Communication put them out through Facebook and through Twitter. And so now what we're going to do, because each of these videos are anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, and they are chock full of so much information. And we can really dig deeper into what the schools are doing and tying it to both the national standards and the 4 essential elements. So we're going to be moving the videos to their corresponding essential element page, and then I'm going to put together a processing guide. So just a one-pager that schools or districts or classes in prep programs can take and discuss, questions for them to discuss, and key takeaways from each of the videos. So that is our next step, because I want to make the videos as user-friendly as possible, because they are truly phenomenal. And you can see all my different hairstyles in all of them. I don't like the fact that I'm making a weird face, like mid-word in every single one of these. So I'm trying to look past that. You'll see here Fort Lewis College. I met with Kate Suazo down there, Chris, the COVID case management team. So we have 2 higher ed examples here, a lot of elementary, some secondary, and some district level. And also, Kristen, I didn't forget. So one of the videos that we talked about from Douglas County, this one down here, the connection, that is the practice I mentioned, where it's really building Spanish-speaking parents' capacity to serve in a leadership role. So they have the one-pager, but I highly recommend going to this video as well and hearing all of the good work that Becky Core is doing in Douglas County. So again, a whole bunch of resources on here. Going back to let me go back to presenter mode here. So we have the framework, we have some research briefs that are up there in the top of the middle screen. The Colorado Academic Standards, the Standards Office, has family and community guides, so that's the very bottom middle image. And again, click on it and it will bring it up, where all of the Colorado Academic Standards it's at least kindergarten, it might even be preschool, but don't quote me on that, through grade 12 in English and Spanish are available. And so these would be a great resource for if one of your pre-service teachers is hosting a parent-teacher conference for example, and they want to talk about what is required for a junior in high school to learn in chemistry, for example. I don't know. I took chemistry my junior year. They could have that one pager in either English or Spanish to give to the parent so they know what the expectation is and what that looks like in practice. We also, the image of the three hands coming together, that is from the Office of Learning Supports. So that is where multi-tiered system of supports is housed at CDE. And they're working with me to put together a series of online academies for family, school, and community partnerships. So we have the first academy up. We're going to have a total of 7 or 8, I believe, by the start of next calendar year, so very soon. And they're each just 10-minute segments that, go through some basics of family, school, community partnerships. There's follow-up recommended readings. There's a processing guide. So I recommend going there and checking out the first module, the first academy that we have. I think the whole thing is called an academy, and then each individual 10-minute chunk, they've just changed to be called a lesson. So I'm still getting used to their changing terminology. So those are the resources we have available. I am going to stop sharing and stop talking, and I would love to hear from you. Again, any follow-up questions that you may have, how you could potentially incorporate this, other sharing opportunities. I'm going to stop talking.
So Darcy, this is a lot of great stuff. It's also a lot of stuff for, somebody not familiar with all of the work. If I was going to share it with prep providers that were, hoping to incorporate FCSP into their programs more, where would we start? What do you recommend?
Yep, I'm putting on my adjunct hat right now. I think something that I'm going to incorporate in my course when I teach again in the spring is the videos. Okay. I think I would start at the videos so that the students, the pre-service students, can hear some examples, not just read them, not just read the one pager, but hear what is going on across the state. And you could match it with, grade level. So I'm just thinking, so most of my students some are gen ed pre-service teachers, but most are school psych and early childhood special ed. So I'd probably, if they are working as a school psychologist in a middle school, I might show them a middle school example or an elementary school example that's really easy to implement at any level. Okay. So I would probably start there with the videos because that's most concrete and I think user friendly.
Very cool.
Yeah. You could really start anywhere, but I know that, again, the promising partnership practices, even just the one pagers, really resonate with a lot of people.
So, and then if I heard you right, for every one pager in the promising practices, the annual books you have, for this year, there's a corresponding video.
Not everyone, for 28 of them.
Okay, right.
So 28 out of the 36, 37, who are somewhere around there, have the corresponding video. Yeah. And because people like them so much, because I've gotten such great feedback, we're probably going to keep it an annual tradition. We'll see. We'll see how many gray hairs I have at this time next year. Yeah. Because it was a lot of work, but so worth it. And I loved every second of it. And I cried multiple times.
I bet. How exciting.
Every time you see me take a sip of water, not today with my teeth. That was me like, don't cry, take a sip of water instead. Awesome. What else? Yeah.
Also, maybe the self-assessment, would that be appropriate?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of different practice opportunities that I like giving to my students at DU. And I think, again, during spring quarter, I may have them, pick one of the essential elements, choose a corresponding guiding question, work with it with your mentor teacher, or see if your principal will let you do it with a group of parents and gather that. So one of the assignments that I have in the class I teach is the students, they can either work individually or with a group of up to 3 people, and they're supposed to do a passion project. And so sometimes the passion project is, one year students put together a brochure explaining the difference between a social worker, a counselor, and a school psychologist, for example. Another year, a student actually put in place a family closet. So basically a donation closet in the school where families could donate gently used items, and families in need could go in and take them. And so I could see maybe going through the rubrics and implementing some of them, and then giving guidance about some next concrete steps that schools can do to improve that essential element. That could be a passion project. I'm thinking off the cuff here. I'm revising my syllabus as I'm teaching, which is always such a pain. Kristen,
your comment about helping students find practice opportunities, I'm already thinking about something as simple as, role playing, calling a parent, or role playing parent teacher conferences. I'd love for it to be with actual students, but as an initial learning point, doing it with each other. Someone takes on the role of a parent and experiences what that's like, because I would agree with you, the scariest part of your first year of teaching is parent teacher conferences and knowing how to interact with parents. And so I'm brainstorming ways to help our teacher candidates have those experiences.
Yeah, that is a great idea. So maybe I'm just thinking back to my example where they're all terrified to make that positive phone call home, maybe practicing in the class the week before it's due, making a positive phone call home, even literally on the phone. One student could go outside, another student could be in the classroom. I'm sure we're going to be virtual again this coming year, and actually practice making that call.
Yeah, it could be a great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions, comments, thoughts? I know it's a lot of information, a lot of things to dig through.
One more, Darcy. Teresa and Kristen are at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design at REMCAD. They prepare art teachers. Can you think of anything specific?
Yes. And then Damien, we will go to you because I know you had a question too. So
sorry, Damien, if I jumped you. You just have to.
So I'm looking. No, you're totally fine, Britt. I'm looking here because one of the promising practice videos was actually with an art teacher. If it looks like I'm looking through you on the screen, I'm not. I'm just scrolling through the videos to see which one it was. It was something like a culture and art night. And it was in Aurora. Oh, yep, culture and community night at Altura Elementary School in Aurora Public Schools. So that is a great example of what was a family engagement liaison as well as the school's art teacher partnering with the Denver Art Museum to have this culture and community night. So that's a concrete example of something for art.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Damien?
Yeah, just real quick on that. Last year, we had an event at our school pre-COVID. The art teachers did an art show, and the family turnout for that was absolutely amazing, and displayed, all of the students' art. And that leads me to what I was going to talk about was for those candidates, for those teacher candidates, it's really important thinking back to the flamboyant that you shared, those low impact, high impact, right? And to get them to understand that everything doesn't always have to be high impact. Some of your low impact stuff can be so meaningful as well. So for us, that art show was so successful, and it brought families into the building, and seeing their students' artwork was such a great source of pride for them. And they're able to just have conversations with staff members that are here and with their students and other families. And it's really great. I think about a couple of teachers here that they do celebrations in their classroom, and they're both Spanish-speaking teachers, and they do teach Spanish. But they do celebrations with their families. So the families will come in like around Dia de los Muertos, and then they'll pick another time in the spring. So all of the families will come in and do potluck style just into the classroom. And they clear the classroom out, and they put on the cumbias and the salsas, and the families dance with the students, and everybody brought their food, and they're eating their food and just sharing their time together. But what's so amazing is you see those kiddos do really well academically in those classes. And those teachers have a great connection to those families because they can literally just get them on the phone so easily to have conversations around academics. And, hey, I noticed, your kiddos, not really engaged this week, or, let's just talk, how are things going? And those families will come to those teachers with everything and anything in terms of help that they need or whatever. So, the event itself probably wouldn't score high on the high impact, but it really goes a long way. So just encourage them to remember that. Remember, don't always shoot for just the super high impact of the scale. Some of those low impact things can be so meaningful as well in building those relationships.
Absolutely. And you can even combine them, right? So you can have a display, a student showcase, but then maybe that's the beginning part, and then you have a goal setting talk, so you can have them as standalone, or you can combine. There's a whole lot of ways to do it, but I absolutely agree. Thinking back, I started my career as a first grade teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools, and some of the most powerful things that I did with families were having, one year, the 100th day of school was also on Valentine's Day. So we had a big celebration, and we made it academic focused because students shared some of the math projects that they did for the 100th day of school. But then it was also a party, a Valentine's Day party that ended up being a potluck. And I think that year I had 26 students, I believe, and 24 out of the 26 students' parents showed up in the middle of the day to come and participate around lunchtime. So yeah, it's really impactful. And I think, again, just thinking through a prep program lens, I think the more examples that these future teachers have to see what are other more seasoned teachers doing, and and then thinking through how could this work in my context. So Cookie Hansen, who is my district contact in Aurora Public Schools, she works primarily with school level family engagement liaisons. And one of the activities that she has her liaisons do, I think they meet, it's either once a week or once a month, I don't remember, but Cookie picks her favorite promising partnership practices from the most recent edition. And she has her liaisons work together in groups of 2 or 3, read through just the first half of just the first paragraph, setting up what the practice is. And then she has the liaisons brainstorm what they think the rest of the practice is. And then Cookie has them read what the entire practice is and then compare. Oh, this is what Jeffco did. Would this work? What would need to change? What would stay the same in Aurora? So that could be another easy activity to do within some of your courses. Other questions or comments? So I'm hoping that the number one thing you take away from this session is that there are a lot of resources available that can help support whatever role you're in implementing family school community partnerships. And I am always more than happy to either wear my CDE hat, my former teacher hat, my adjunct hat, to talk through some ideas, share what has worked, what has not worked. At this point, I feel like I've seen it all. even though each time I think that I see something new. So yes, anything else? Britt, Chris, anything else you want to chime in with?
Jenny wanted to know if the chart for high impact.
Yes, absolutely. Everything will be shared. And so Britt, when you send out, I assume they're coming from you because you have the attendee list, feel free to send it out as a PowerPoint and not as a PDF. Like anything that I put together, I want shared far and wide. So take it, use it, share it. I'm not one of these people who, I was going to say I'm not territorial. I try not to be territorial.
Darcy, is your email address also in that presentation?
Yes, I believe it's on the first slide.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and again, truly, please feel free to follow up with any questions. I like chatting with people. So, and Britt, after you stop recording, if others want to stay on briefly to hear a funny student showcase experience, I have a funny student showcase experience story.
Thank you.
All right.
I was saying, awesome, Darcy. This is so helpful. Thank you so much for sharing all this information.
You're welcome. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. It's exciting.